The champagne glass hit the floor before I could stop it. The sound, sharp, final, like a bone snapping, cut through the laughter floating in from the living room. But I barely heard it. All I could see was my husband's hand on her waist. My son's fiancée. The woman who was supposed to marry into our family in 3 days. They didn't pull apart when they saw me. That's what broke me first. Not the betrayal itself, but the slowness of their reaction. Like they had time. Like I was the one interrupting something that had every right to exist. Her lipstick was smudged. His collar was wrinkled. And for one impossible second, she smiled at me. Not nervous. Not apologetic. Just amused. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat closed around words too big to fit through it. The tray in my hands tilted, and I watched the remaining glasses slide toward the edge in slow motion, champagne sloshing like liquid gold about to spill. Then I felt a hand on my wrist. Steady. Firm. My son. Cashin appeared beside me like he'd been waiting in the shadows. He caught the tray before it could fall completely, his fingers wrapping around mine with a pressure that felt like a warning. When I looked at him, his face was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes after you've already screamed yourself empty in private. "Mom," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Don't." I tried to pull away, to turn back toward them, to demand an explanation, to shatter the moment with the rage building in my chest. But his grip tightened. I already knew. The words landed like stones in deep water, sinking slowly until I felt them settle in my gut. He knew? And it's worse than you think. Would you have stayed silent in that moment? Would you have trusted your child's judgment over your own fury? Tell me in the comments, because I'm still not sure I made the right choice. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The rest of the night moved like a dream I couldn't wake up from. I set the tray down somewhere. I smiled at someone. I said words that made sense enough that no one asked questions. But inside, I was screaming. My husband walked past me twice. Once to refill his drink. Once to laugh at someone's joke about marriage being the ultimate partnership. He didn't look at me. Not once. And somehow, that felt worse than the affair itself. Like I'd already been erased. Like I was a ghost haunting my own life. The fiancée, her name was Delilah, though I could barely think it without tasting bile, floated through the room in a cream-colored dress that cost more than my first car. She touched people's arms when she spoke. She threw her head back when she laughed. She played the role of the perfect bride so well that I almost doubted what I'd seen. Almost. Cashin stayed close to me the entire night. Not hovering. Just present. Every time I felt myself start to crack, I'd catch his eye across the room, and he'd give me the smallest nod. A signal. Hold on. Not yet. When the last guest finally left, I stood in the kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and half-empty wine glasses. My hands shook as I ran water in the sink, watching it swirl down the drain like it could wash away what I knew. My husband came in, loosening his tie. He kissed my cheek, actually kissed my cheek, and said, "Great party, Sarah. You really outdid yourself." I wanted to throw a plate at his head. I wanted to ask him how long. I wanted to know if he'd ever loved me at all, or if our entire marriage had been a performance I was too stupid to see through. Instead, I said, "Thank you." He went upstairs. I heard the shower turn on. Heard him humming. Like this was just another Thursday night in a happy home. I don't know how long I stood there, hands submerged in soapy water that had gone cold. But eventually, Cashin appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone his age. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, I'll show you everything." I dried my hands on a towel that suddenly felt too rough against my skin. Everything. He nodded. It's not just an affair, Mom. It's bigger than that. They're not just betraying you with. He gestured vaguely, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. They're erasing you. Legally. Financially. They've been planning this for months. The kitchen floor tilted under my feet. What do you mean, erasing me? Cashin's jaw tightened. The house. Grandma's cottage. The farmland Dad said was in both your names. He paused, and I watched him gather courage I didn't know he possessed. None of it has your name on it anymore. They've been transferring everything. And if this wedding happens... He stopped, swallowed hard. If this wedding happens, you'll have nothing. Not even proof you were ever here. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smirk. His hand on her waist. The casual way they turned toward me, like I was a servant who'd walked in without knocking. My husband slipped into bed around 2 in the morning. I felt the mattress dip under his weight, heard him sigh like he'd had a long, exhausting day of honest work. He smelled like mint gum and expensive cologne. The kind he only wore when he wanted to impress someone. I lay there, stiff as a corpse, counting the rotations of the ceiling fan. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere around 47, I stopped counting and started wondering how many nights I'd spent next to a stranger. Morning came like a punishment. The sun was too bright. The birds were too loud. Everything felt wrong, like I'd woken up in a copy of my life that was just slightly off. I forced myself downstairs. Cashin was already at the breakfast table, his coffee untouched, staring at nothing. Dark circles hung under his eyes. He looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. Then she walked in. Delilah. Bright-eyed, humming some pop song, her phone glued to her hand like it was keeping her alive. She poured herself orange juice, kissed Cashin on the cheek. Actually kissed him, like nothing had happened, and smiled at me. Good morning, Serafina. Did you sleep well? The audacity of it made my stomach turn. I gripped my coffee mug so hard I thought it might shatter. Fine, I managed. My husband followed her in, perfectly pressed shirt, hair still damp from his shower. He poured himself juice with the calm of a man who'd never done a single thing wrong in his entire life. Big day ahead, he said, glancing at Delilah. Final vendor confirmations, right? She nodded, typing something into her phone. Already handled most of it. I'm very organized. She looked at me then, and I swear I saw something flicker in her eyes. Triumph? Mockery? Unlike some people. Cashin's fork clattered against his plate. The rest of breakfast was torture. They talked about seating arrangements and cake flavors while I sat there feeling myself disappear. Every time I tried to speak, someone talked over me. Every time I reached for something, it had already been moved. I was being erased. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just slowly, like someone was using whiteout on my existence, one layer at a time. After breakfast, I noticed something. Delilah carried her phone everywhere. To the bathroom. To the porch. Even when she was talking to someone face to face, her hand stayed wrapped around it like it held state secrets. And my husband kept glancing at his watch. Not casually. Nervously. Like he was waiting for something. I started paying attention to the small things. The way they'd exchange looks across the room. The way certain conversations would stop when I entered. The way my husband suddenly needed to reorganize his office and didn't want me going in there. That afternoon, while everyone was supposedly running wedding errands, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went looking. The hallway filing cabinet had always been my domain. Insurance papers, old tax returns, My mother's recipes in a worn folder labeled Essentials. But when I opened it, something felt off. I pulled out the insurance folder. Behind it, wedged in the back, was a slim envelope I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened it. Property deeds. Our house. My mother's cottage that she'd left specifically to me. Even the small piece of farmland my grandmother had passed down through 3 generations of women. I read the first document once. Then again. Then a third time, because surely I was reading it wrong. My name wasn't on it. Instead, bold and confident, my husband's signature appeared next to a notary stamp. And below it, in smaller print that made my vision blur, was another name. Delilah Margrave. The woman who was supposed to marry my son had somehow ended up on the deed to my mother's cottage. My legs gave out. I sat right there on the hallway floor, papers scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. Legal, calculated, documented theft. How long had they been planning this? How many papers had I signed without reading carefully, trusting the man I'd spent 28 years building a life with? How many times had he handed me something and said, "Just sign here, honey, it's routine"? I heard footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the papers back into the envelope, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. But I wasn't fast enough. Cashin appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at me on the floor, looked at the envelope in my hands, and his face went pale. "You found them," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. He came down slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. When he reached me, he crouched down and put his hand over mine. "Mom, there's more. So much more." He pulled something from his pocket. A small flash drive. "I've been copying files from Dad's office for 3 weeks. Every email, every contract, every piece of evidence I could find." I stared at the flash drive like it was a bomb. Evidence of what? Cashin's jaw tightened. Evidence that she's not marrying me for love. Evidence that Dad's helping her. Evidence that they're planning to take everything and leave us with nothing. The flash drive sat on my kitchen table like a loaded gun. I'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, afraid to touch it, afraid of what I'd find inside. Cashin had gone upstairs to shower, giving me space to process. But how do you process the fact that your entire life might be a lie documented in digital files? I made coffee I didn't drink. I wiped down counters that were already clean. I did anything to avoid plugging that drive into my laptop. Finally, I couldn't put it off anymore. The first file was an email. From my husband to Delilah. Subject line, Phase 2 complete. My hands trembled as I read. D. The cottage transfer went through. She signed without question, just like you said she would. Next week, we'll handle the farmland. By the time the wedding happens, everything will be positioned exactly where we need it. After the marriage, the prenup clause kicks in. 6 months, then the divorce, and you walk away with your half plus what we've already moved. She'll never see it coming. J. I read it 3 times. Then I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Phase 2. Like I was part of some business plan. Like our marriage was just a shell company they were liquidating. When I came back, Cashin was sitting at the table, the laptop open in front of him. He didn't say anything. Just clicked to the next file. Property transfer documents. Dated 2 months ago. My signature at the bottom, but I didn't remember signing anything. The notary stamp looked official, but something about it felt wrong. The date said I'd signed on a Tuesday. But 2 months ago on that Tuesday, I'd been at my sister's house in Connecticut. I had plane tickets to prove it. It's forged, Cashin said quietly. That's not even your real signature. Look at the loop in the S. You always make it wider. He was right. This signature was close, but not exact. Someone had practiced it, gotten good at it, but not perfect. How many documents? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Cashin clicked through folders. 17 that I found. Maybe more hidden in accounts I couldn't access. 17 forged signatures. 17 pieces of my life redistributed like I was already dead. I thought about every time my husband had asked me to sign something real quick while I was cooking dinner or folding laundry. Every time he'd said, "Don't worry about reading it, it's just routine paperwork." Every time I'd trusted him because that's what you do when you've been married for nearly 3 decades. Trust. What a stupid, dangerous thing. There's more, Cashin said, and I wanted to laugh because of course there was. The prenup. He opened another document. A draft prenuptial agreement. My son's name at the top, Delilah's beside it. But as I read through the asset list, my blood went cold. The house was listed. My mother's cottage. The farmland. Even my grandmother's antique jewelry collection that I'd promised to pass down to Cashin's future children. None of it was Cashin's to include in a prenup. None of it was even legally his yet. But there it was in black and white, ready to be divided up in a divorce that was apparently already planned before the marriage even happened. You were never going to stay married to her, I said, looking at my son. He shook his head. I don't think she ever planned to stay married to me either. I think the whole point was to get legal access to family assets, then bail with half of everything in the divorce. But that's not how prenups work. You can't just. You can if the prenup is structured right and no one questions it, Cashin interrupted. You can if one party doesn't have a good lawyer. You can if everyone assumes it's a normal divorce and doesn't look too closely at what's being divided. I felt dizzy. The kitchen was spinning. Why? I asked. Why would your father do this to us? To you? You're his son. Cashin's face hardened. I stopped being his son the minute I became a liability to whatever plan they have. I think he's in debt, Mom. Deep. I found bank statements showing accounts I've never heard of. Loans. Credit lines maxed out. I think he's been hiding financial problems for years, and this, he gestured at the laptop, this is his way out. Marry me off to someone willing to play along, liquidate everything quietly through legal channels, split the proceeds, and disappear before anyone realizes what happened. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial. Strategic. Cold-blooded. We need help, I said. We can't fight this alone. Cashin nodded. I know someone. A paralegal named Maribel Quinlan. She helped my roommate's family with an estate dispute last year. She's sharp. Really sharp. She notices things other people miss. Can we trust her? Mom, at this point, we have to trust someone. He was right. We couldn't do this alone. But the thought of bringing someone else into this nightmare, of admitting out loud that my marriage was a fraud and my family was falling apart, made me want to crawl into bed and never come out. Still, I nodded. Cashin pulled out his phone and sent a text. 3 minutes later, he got a response. She'll meet us tomorrow. Downtown. The cafe on 5th Street. Tomorrow felt too soon and not soon enough. That night, my husband came home late. Again. He kissed my forehead. Again. Asked how my day was. Again. I smiled and said, fine. But inside, I was counting. Counting the lies. Counting the signatures. Counting the days until I could look him in the eye and watch his perfect mask finally crack. The cafe on 5th Street smelled like burnt coffee and old pastries. Cashin and I sat in a corner booth, both of us nursing drinks we weren't actually drinking. I'd barely slept again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw documents with my forged signature, emails planning my erasure, my husband's face smiling at me while he dismantled my existence. Maribel Quinlan arrived exactly on time. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue everything about us in 3 seconds. She wore a grey blazer and carried a leather bag that looked expensive but worn, like it had seen 1,000 battles. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Show me everything," she said, setting her laptop on the table. Cashin handed her the flash drive. She plugged it in, and her fingers moved across the keyboard like she was playing an instrument. For 10 minutes, she didn't speak. Just clicked, scrolled, zoomed in on details I hadn't even noticed. Finally, she looked up. "This is worse than fraud," she said quietly. "This is a conspiracy. Premeditated, organized, and almost clever." Almost. That word hung in the air. Almost. I asked. Maribel turned the laptop toward us, pointing at a document. "Your husband made mistakes. Small ones. But when you're committing financial fraud, small mistakes become big evidence." She clicked to another file. "This signature? Forged on a date when you were provably out of state. This notary stamp? The license number belongs to someone who retired 8 months before this document was supposedly signed. And this email," she tapped the screen, "was sent at 2:17 in the morning from an IP address traced to your husband's office, right after he searched how to transfer property without spouse knowledge." I would have laughed if it wasn't my life being discussed. "He Googled it?" Cashin said, disbelief in his voice. "People always Google it," Maribel said. "Criminals think they're smarter than they are. The smart ones get caught because they document everything. The stupid ones get caught because they don't know what they're doing. Your father falls somewhere in the middle." She pulled out a yellow notepad and started writing. "Here's what we know. 1. Your assets have been systematically transferred through forged documents. 2. The transfers are tied to a wedding that serves as a legal vehicle for further asset movement. 3. There's a planned divorce with a prenup designed to split assets that don't legally belong to either party. 4. Your husband is likely in serious debt and using this scheme to cover it." "Can we stop it?" I asked. Maribel looked at me with something like sympathy. "We can try. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quiet. If we move now, we might be able to freeze the assets before the wedding. But that means going public with accusations. That means lawyers, courts, family drama played out in legal filings." "And if we don't move now?" Cashin asked. "Then the wedding happens, the prenup gets signed, and 6 months from now your father and his accomplice walk away with half of everything while you and your mother try to prove fraud after the fact. Which is exponentially harder." I thought about the house where I'd raised my son. The cottage where my mother had taught me to bake bread. The farmland that had been in my family for 3 generations. All of it slipping away because I trusted the wrong person. "What do we do?" I asked. Maribel pulled out another document from her bag. "We file for an emergency freeze on all asset transfers pending investigation. We submit the evidence of forgery. We request a forensic audit of your family finances. And we do it fast, before they realize you know." She slid the document across the table. It was already partially filled out. She'd come prepared. "This will blow up your life," she warned. "Your husband will know you're fighting back. The wedding will probably be cancelled. Your family will be forced to take sides. This won't be clean or easy." I looked at Cashin. He was already nodding. "Do it," I said. Maribel pulled out more papers. "I'll need every document you have. Bank statements, property deeds, emails, anything that shows the timeline of transfers. I'll also need you to document every interaction with your husband from here on out. Dates, times, what was said. If he threatens you, we need proof. For the next 2 hours, we went through everything. Maribel asked questions I didn't know mattered. What time did my husband usually check his email? Did Delilah have access to our home office? Had I noticed any unusual mail or phone calls? Every answer felt like another piece of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. By the time we left the cafe, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because someone finally believed us. Heavier because I knew what was coming. That night, Cashin and I worked in his old bedroom, organizing files and building our case. Around midnight, I heard my husband come home. His footsteps paused outside Cashin's door. I held my breath, laptop screen dimmed, waiting. The doorknob turned slightly. Testing. Then, his voice through the door, "Everything okay in there?" "Fine, Dad," Cashin called out, his voice steady. "Just finishing some work stuff." "This late?" "Deadline." A pause. Then footsteps walking away. We waited 5 minutes before we started breathing normally again. "He suspects something," I whispered. Cashin nodded. "Then we need to move faster." The next morning, Maribel filed the emergency freeze. The courthouse clerk stamped our petition with a sound that felt like a drumbeat. For the first time in months, I felt solid ground beneath my feet. We got the confirmation email at 3 that afternoon. Asset freeze granted pending investigation. All property transfers suspended. Court date scheduled for 2 weeks out. 2 hours later, my husband got the notice. I was in the kitchen when he came home. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he walked in slowly, holding the court document in his hand, his face completely calm. "Serafina," he said, my full name sounding like a threat. "We need to talk." My husband stood in the kitchen doorway holding that court document like it was a weapon. For a moment, neither of us moved. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went silent. "You think you've won something?" His voice was low, controlled. The kind of calm that comes right before an explosion. I gripped the edge of the counter. "I think I've protected what's mine." He laughed. Actually laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "What's yours? Serafina, do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I know exactly what I've done." He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to back away. "This will ruin Cashin's future. His wedding. His reputation. All because you couldn't mind your own business." The audacity of it took my breath away. "My own business? You forged my signature. You transferred property that belonged to my mother. You helped that woman." "Careful," he interrupted, his eyes flashing. "Be very careful what you accuse me of." "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that are now in front of a judge." His jaw tightened. For the first time in 28 years of marriage, I saw something in his face that scared me. Not anger. Not shame. Something colder. Calculation. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he said quietly. "No idea of the consequences." "Then enlighten me." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched him decide something. Then he turned and walked out. Not upstairs. Out the front door. His car started, and he was gone. I stood there shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. My phone buzzed. A text from Cashin. "You okay?" I heard raised voices. "I'm fine," I texted back, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Another text came through. This one from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Maribel. Can you meet tonight?" Something came up with the documents. Important. My stomach dropped. Important could mean anything. Important could mean good. Important could mean our case was falling apart. I drove to Maribel's office just after 7. She worked out of a small suite above a dry cleaner, the kind of place that looked unremarkable but probably saw more secrets than a confessional. When I walked in, she was already spreading documents across her desk, her face intense with concentration. "What is it?" I asked. She looked up, and I couldn't read her expression. "I found something. I've been going through the metadata on all the documents your son copied. Dates, timestamps, file creation information. And I found a pattern." She turned her laptop toward me. Every single forged document was created within a 3-day window. All of them. Someone was in a hurry, trying to push everything through before a deadline. What deadline? That's what I couldn't figure out. Until I cross-referenced with your husband's bank records. She pulled up another screen. 3 months ago, your husband took out a loan. A big one. $500,000. Due date? Next month. With a balloon payment he can't possibly make unless he liquidates assets. The pieces started clicking together in my head. He's not just stealing from me. He's desperate. Exactly. Desperate people make mistakes. And your husband made several. She clicked through more files. This prenup? It wasn't just designed to split assets after a divorce. It was designed to use your son's marriage as a legal shield for moving money. Delilah marries Cashin, assets get transferred into the marriage, then they divorce and split everything. Your husband pays off his debt with his share. Delilah gets paid for her participation. And you. I get nothing. Worse. You get blamed. Because according to these documents, you're the one who authorized all the transfers. Your forged signature is on everything. If this had gone through without anyone catching it, you'd be the one facing fraud charges while they walked away clean. I felt like I'd been punched. They were going to frame me? Maribel nodded slowly. I think that was always the plan. You weren't just being erased. You were being set up. The room spun. I sat down hard in the chair across from her desk. But we have proof now, she continued. Proof that the signatures are forged. Proof that your husband initiated everything. Proof of the timeline and the motive. We have enough to not only stop them but to flip this completely. How? She pulled out another document. This is a draft prenuptial agreement. But buried in the asset list is something interesting. Your husband included property that doesn't exist. A vacation home in Vermont that you've never owned. Investment accounts with fictional identification numbers. He padded the asset list to make the split look more legitimate. Why would he include fake assets? Because he's an idiot, Maribel said bluntly. He got greedy. Thought if he inflated the total value, his half would look more reasonable. But fake assets are provable. We can show that these things don't exist, which means the entire prenup is fraudulent. Which means the whole scheme falls apart, I finished. She smiled. Now you're thinking like a paralegal. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. Not happiness. Not relief. Just the solid, steady feeling that maybe, just maybe, we could actually win this. There's one more thing, Maribel said, her tone shifting. I need to prepare you for what comes next. When we present this evidence, your husband will likely try to settle. He'll offer to return everything, sign papers, disappear quietly. He'll want to avoid criminal charges. And if I don't accept a settlement? Then we go to court. We make this public. We potentially press charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Your husband could face prison time. Delilah too. The thought should have made me happy. Instead, it just made me tired. What would you do? I asked. Maribel leaned back in her chair. I'd make him sweat first. Let him think we're going for blood. Then, when he's desperate enough, I'd take a settlement that gives you everything you're owed plus damages. Not because I'm merciful, but because court cases are expensive, emotionally draining, and unpredictable. Sometimes the best revenge is walking away whole while they lose everything. I thought about Cashin. About the wedding that was supposed to happen in 2 days. About the family that would never be the same regardless of what we did. I need to talk to my son, I said. Maribel nodded. Talk to him. Then decide. But decide fast. Because tomorrow, your husband is going to get the full evidence file. And when he sees what we have, everything changes. I drove home in the dark, my mind racing. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Cashin sitting on the front porch waiting. He stood when he saw me. Mom? What happened? I walked up the steps and sat down beside him. For a moment, I didn't speak. Just looked at the house where I'd spent 28 years building a life that turned out to be a lie. Maribel found something, I said finally. Evidence that could destroy your father completely. Cashin was quiet for a long time. Then, what do you want to do? I looked at my son. At his tired eyes and his too old expression. At the way he'd become my ally in a war he never should have had to fight. I want to make sure you're okay, I said. That's all I've ever wanted. He took my hand. Then let's finish this. The next morning, Maribel sent the complete evidence file to my husband's email. We waited. 1 hour. 2 hours. Then, at exactly 11:30, my phone rang. It was him. We need to meet, he said, his voice stripped of all pretense. Just you and me. Before this goes any further. Why? A pause. Then, quietly, because I'm asking you to. I looked at Cashin, who was listening. He shook his head slowly. Don't trust him. But I needed to look my husband in the eye one more time. Needed to hear him try to explain the unexplainable. Fine, I said. Tomorrow. Noon. The coffee shop on Market Street. I hung up before he could respond. Cashin grabbed my arm. Mom, what if he tries something? Then Maribel has instructions to send everything to the prosecutor, I said. He knows that. And besides, I looked at my son. I need to hear him admit it. I need to know if there was ever anything real between us, or if I've been married to a stranger for 3 decades. The truth is, I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear him say it. The investigation became my second life. While my husband smiled at breakfast and Delilah planned wedding details that would never happen, Cashin and I lived in shadows. We met Maribel in parking garages and coffee shops 3 towns over. We photographed documents at midnight. We tracked every lie with timestamps and metadata. I learned things I never wanted to know. How to spot a forged notary seal. How digital signatures leave fingerprints in file properties. How people who think they're clever always make the same stupid mistakes. We found 17 forged documents. 17 times my husband had practiced my signature until he got it close enough. Not perfect, the loop in my S was always slightly off, but close enough that a casual observer wouldn't notice. Each discovery felt like another layer of skin being peeled away. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditation. Planning. Cold calculation stretched across months of fake smiles and empty promises. Cashin barely spoke during those weeks. He'd become someone else. Harder. Older. The boy who used to leave his socks on the floor and forget to call on my birthday had transformed into a man who catalogued evidence with the precision of a detective. One night, we found bank statements showing accounts I'd never heard of. Credit cards maxed out. Loans with interest rates that made my stomach turn. My husband owed over $600,000 to people whose names sounded like they belonged in crime movies. He's drowning, Maribel said when we showed her. This isn't greed. This is desperation. Desperate people do terrible things. How long has he been hiding this? I asked. She scrolled through dates. At least 5 years. Maybe longer. He's been juggling debt, moving money between accounts, using credit to pay credit. It's a house of cards, and it's about to collapse. So we were never the target, Cashin said slowly. We were the escape plan. Maribel nodded. Liquidate everything, pay off the debts, disappear with whatever's left. Your mother gets blamed for the fraud, you get left with nothing, and they start over somewhere else with clean records and full pockets. The cruelty of it took my breath away. But then my husband started noticing. Small things at first. He'd ask where I'd been. Why Cashin was home so often. Why I seemed distracted. His questions felt like tests, and I failed every one by lying straight to his face. Everything's fine, I'd say. Just wedding stress. He'd watch me for a beat too long, then nod. But I could see the suspicion building behind his eyes. One Thursday night, I came home from meeting Maribel to find my husband in Cashin's old bedroom. Just standing there. Looking around like he was searching for something. What are you doing? I asked, my heart hammering. He turned slowly. Have you noticed Cashin's been acting strange? He's getting married. Everyone acts strange before their wedding. Maybe. He walked past me, pausing at the doorway. Or maybe something else is going on. After he left, I checked the room. Everything looked untouched, but I knew better. He'd been looking for evidence that we were building a case. Which meant he suspected. Which meant we were running out of time. The next morning, Maribel called with urgency in her voice. We need to move now. File everything today. If we wait any longer, he might destroy evidence or transfer assets we haven't frozen yet. The wedding's in 3 days, I said. I know. That's exactly why we need to do this now. Before he can use that wedding as a legal shield. That afternoon, we filed every document. Emergency asset freeze. Fraud investigation request. Forensic audit of all family accounts. We submitted evidence of forgery, false notarization, and conspiracy to commit theft. The court clerk stamped each page with a sound that felt like justice finally waking up. 2 hours later, my husband got the notice. I was in the kitchen when he came home. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he walked in slowly, holding the court document, his face completely calm. Serafina. My full name sounded like a threat. We need to talk. I gripped the counter. So talk. You think you've won something here? You think this ends well for anyone? I think it ends honestly. He stepped closer, and every instinct screamed at me to back away. But I held my ground. This will ruin Cashin's future. His wedding. His reputation. All because you couldn't mind your own business. The audacity made me laugh. Actually laugh. My own business? You forged my signature 17 times. You tried to steal property that belonged to my mother. You conspired with our son's fiancée to frame me for fraud. And you're talking about minding my own business. His jaw tightened. For the first time in 28 years, I saw something in his face that genuinely scared me. Not anger. Something colder. You have no idea what you're interfering with, he said quietly. No idea of the consequences. Then enlighten me. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out. Not upstairs. Out the front door. His car started, tires squealed, and he was gone. I stood there shaking, phone already in my hand, texting Maribel, "He knows." "What now?" Her response came immediately, "Now we prepare for war." The emergency hearing was scheduled for the day before the wedding. Maribel said it was the fastest she'd ever seen a judge move, which either meant our evidence was that compelling or the judge had seen this kind of scheme before and hated it. I didn't sleep the night before. Couldn't eat. Couldn't think about anything except walking into that courtroom and facing my husband across a legal battlefield. Cashin drove me. Neither of us spoke during the 20-minute drive. What was there to say? Everything we'd built toward came down to this: a judge's decision, evidence on paper, truth measured in timestamps and metadata. The courthouse smelled like old wood and anxiety. Maribel met us in the hallway, carrying 3 overstuffed folders and wearing the expression of someone about to win a fight. "They're already here," she said quietly. "Your husband brought 2 lawyers. Expensive ones." And Delilah? Sitting beside him. Looking nervous. Good, I thought. She should be nervous. We walked into the courtroom, and I saw him. My husband of 28 years, sitting ramrod straight in a suit I'd helped him pick out 5 years ago. Delilah sat beside him, her hands folded, her face carefully blank. He didn't look at me. Not once. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had probably seen every scheme humanity could devise. She sat, opened the file in front of her, and spent 5 full minutes reading in silence. Finally, she looked up. "Mrs. Lorraine, I've reviewed your petition and the accompanying evidence. This is extensive." Maribel stood. "Your Honor, we have documented 17 instances of signature forgery, multiple cases of fraudulent notarization, and clear evidence of conspiracy to commit financial fraud. We're requesting an immediate and permanent freeze on all asset transfers, plus a full forensic audit of all accounts connected to the respondent." One of my husband's lawyers stood. "Your Honor, these are serious accusations based on circumstantial." Circumstantial. The judge's voice could have cut glass. "Counsel, I'm looking at metadata showing documents were signed when Mrs. Lorraine was provably in another state. I'm seeing notary stamps from licenses that were expired or retired. This isn't circumstantial. This is evidence." The lawyer sat down. The judge turned to my husband. "Mr. Lorraine, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you forge your wife's signature on property transfer documents?" Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. "Mr. Lorraine, I asked you a question." His lawyer whispered something. My husband's jaw tightened. "I may have signed some documents on her behalf. For convenience. She was busy and without her knowledge or consent." Another pause. "Yes." The courtroom felt like all the air had been sucked out of it. The judge made a note. "And Ms. Margrave," she looked at Delilah, "what is your relationship to these property transfers?" Delilah's voice came out small. "I don't know what you're talking about." Maribel stood again. "Your Honor, we have emails between Ms. Margrave and Mr. Lorraine discussing asset division, timeline coordination, and post-divorce distribution plans. Ms. Margrave's name appears on 3 property deeds that were transferred without Mrs. Lorraine's knowledge." "I didn't," Delilah started, but her voice cracked. "He told me it was legal. He said everything was handled properly." My husband's head whipped toward her. "Delilah, don't." "Counsel, control your client," the judge snapped. Then to Delilah, "Continue." Delilah was crying now. "He said we'd split everything after the divorce. That it was all legal. That his wife had agreed. I didn't know he was forging anything. I swear I didn't know." Lies. All lies. but useful ones. The judge leaned back. Here's what's going to happen. All asset transfers are frozen immediately. A forensic accountant will audit every account connected to this family. Mr. Lorraine, you are not to access, transfer, or liquidate any assets pending the results of that audit. Ms. Margrave, you're to surrender any claim to properties listed under your name. And, she looked directly at my husband. If this investigation finds evidence of criminal fraud, I will personally refer this case to the district attorney. My husband's lawyers started whispering urgently. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, given the evidence of conspiracy, I'm issuing a restraining order. Mr. Lorraine, you are not to contact, threaten, or intimidate Mrs. Lorraine in any way. Violation will result in immediate arrest. She slammed her gavel. We're adjourned. I sat there, unable to move. We'd won. Not everything. Not yet. But we'd won enough. Cashin grabbed my hand. Mom. We did it. As we walked out, I passed my husband in the hallway. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. Like the expensive suit and confident posture had been the only things holding him together, and now they'd failed. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. I kept walking. Outside, Maribel was already on her phone, coordinating next steps with the forensic accountant. Cashin stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders. What happens now? I asked. Maribel looked up. Now? Now they panic. They'll try to settle. Offer to give everything back in exchange for dropping charges. It's what desperate people do when they realize they're caught. And the wedding? I'm guessing that's off. I thought about the chapel reserved for tomorrow. The flowers ordered. The guests planning to attend. The marriage that was never meant to last. Good, I said. That night, my husband didn't come home. I didn't ask where he went. Didn't care. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The wedding day arrived like a storm no one wanted to acknowledge. The chapel was still booked. Flowers had been delivered. Guests had traveled from 3 states, expecting celebration. Instead, they got silence. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the dress I'd bought for this day. Navy blue, elegant, the kind of thing a proud mother wears to her son's wedding. Now it felt like costume jewelry, pretty but meaningless. Cashin knocked softly. Mom? You ready? Ready for what? To watch a wedding that wasn't happening? To face family members who didn't know yet that everything had fallen apart? As ready as I'll ever be. We drove to the chapel in silence. The parking lot was already full. I recognized cars belonging to my sister, my husband's brother, old family friends who'd known Cashin since he was born. How do you tell people that the groom's father tried to steal everything and the bride was in on it? Inside, the chapel looked beautiful. White roses everywhere. Candles waiting to be lit. Rows of seats filled with people dressed in their Sunday best, whispering to each other, checking their watches. My husband stood near the altar, talking quietly with the officiant. He looked calm, composed. Like nothing had happened in that courtroom 2 days ago. Delilah was nowhere to be seen. I took my seat in the front row. Cashin sat beside me, his jaw tight, his hands clasped so hard his knuckles were white. Are you sure about this? I whispered. He nodded. People need to know the truth. Not rumors. Not gossip. The truth. The music started. Traditional. Beautiful. Wrong. The officiant stepped forward. Friends and family, we gather here today to celebrate the union of. Stop. Cashin's voice rang out clear and steady. Every head turned. He stood, walked to the front of the chapel, and faced the crowd. Behind him, a projection screen flickered to life, something he'd arranged without telling me. Before we go any further, Cashin said, his voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word, there are things you need to know. Things I need you to see. The screen lit up. Email exchanges. Timestamps. Property transfer documents. Bank statements. Every piece of evidence we'd gathered, displayed in simple, undeniable clarity. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father, Cashin's voice cracked, has been systematically stealing from my mother for months. Forging her signature. Transferring property that belonged to her family. Planning to frame her for fraud while he disappeared with everything she'd worked for. More gasps. Someone started crying. And Delilah, he gestured to the empty space where the bride should have been standing, was helping him. This wedding was never about love. It was about legal access to assets. A 6-month marriage followed by a planned divorce that would have left my mother with nothing. The screen cycled through more evidence. Dates. Signatures. Emails discussing Phase 2 and asset distribution. My husband stood frozen, his face drained of color. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Is this true?" Another voice, "How could you?" My sister stood up, staring at my husband with disgust. "You bastard." The officiant backed away from the altar like my husband might be contagious. Cashin kept talking. "I'm showing you this because truth matters. Because my mother deserves better than being erased from her own life. Because," his voice broke completely now, "because I almost let this happen. I knew something was wrong, and I waited too long to act." He looked at me then, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have." I stood and walked to him. Pulled him into a hug while 100 people watched. "You saved me," I whispered. "You saved us both." Behind us, my husband finally moved. He walked toward the side door, his expensive lawyers nowhere in sight, his perfect composure shattered completely. "James!" Someone called after him. "James, you can't just..." But he was already gone. The chapel erupted into chaos. People talking over each other, phones coming out, family members demanding explanations I didn't have energy to give. Maribel appeared beside me. I hadn't even known she was there. "We should go," she said quietly, "before this gets worse." Cashin and I walked out through a side entrance. Behind us, I could still hear voices raised in shock and anger. My phone was already buzzing with texts and calls. Outside, the sun was too bright. Birds were singing. The world kept turning like nothing had happened. "Where's Delilah?" I asked. "Gone," Cashin said. "She left town yesterday. Maribel said she's trying to disappear before the fraud charges get filed." "And your father?" Cashin shrugged. "I don't know. I don't care." But he did care. I could see it in his eyes. That's the thing about betrayal from family. It doesn't stop hurting just because you expose it. We sat in my car for a long time, neither of us ready to drive away. The chapel doors opened periodically, people filing out, some crying, some angry, all of them staring at us through the windshield. Finally, my phone rang. "Maribel. They're offering to settle," she said without preamble. "Your husband's lawyers just sent over terms. He'll return every asset, sign over his portion of everything, resign from any shared accounts or properties, and agree to never contact you again. In exchange, you don't press criminal charges." What do you think? I think he's terrified. I think the public exposure just made him realize he's got no way out. Take the settlement. Get everything back. Move on with your life. I looked at Cashin. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stop thinking about him. I want to stop being angry. I want us to be okay again." Then we take the settlement, I said to Maribel. Smart choice. I'll have papers drawn up by tomorrow. I hung up and started the car. Where are we going? Cashin asked. Home, I said. Our home. The one that's legally mine again. The settlement came through faster than Maribel expected. Within a week, every property deed had been corrected. Every forged signature replaced with legitimate transfers returning everything to my name. Bank accounts restored. Assets unfrozen. My husband signed everything without argument. His lawyers hand-delivered the documents to Maribel's office, and he disappeared. I heard later he'd moved to Arizona, living in some rental with his brother, working a job that paid a fraction of what he'd made before. Delilah tried to fight the charges at first. Hired a lawyer who claimed she was a victim, manipulated by an older man with money problems. But Maribel had emails proving otherwise. Plans Delilah had drafted herself. Calculations of what her cut would be. References to finding another mark after this one played out. Eventually, she took a plea deal. Fraud charges reduced to lesser offenses in exchange for testimony and restitution. She'd be paying me back for years. I should have felt victorious. Should have celebrated. Instead, I just felt tired. The house felt different now. Emptier. Cashin had moved back in temporarily, neither of us ready to be alone yet. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, not talking much, just existing in the same space. One night, my sister came over with wine and determination. You need to do something, she said, pouring 3 glasses. Something for yourself. Not legal stuff. Not revenge. Something that makes you remember who you are outside of this nightmare. Like what? I don't know. Travel? Take a class? Burn all his clothes in a bonfire? That made me laugh. Actually laugh. Tempting. Cashin raised his glass. To Mom, who's stronger than any of us knew. We drank to that. The following weeks brought strange healing. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since Cashin was small. Terrible paintings of flowers and landscapes that looked like a child made them, but they were mine. Created by my hands without anyone's permission or approval. I changed locks. Rearranged furniture. Painted the bedroom a color my husband would have hated. Small acts of reclaiming space. People asked questions. Family members wanted details. Neighbors whispered. But I stopped caring about the story people told about me. I knew my truth. That was enough. 3 months after the settlement, Cashin told me he'd met someone. A woman from his office who didn't know anything about the scandal, who liked him for who he was, not what he had. I'm not rushing anything, he said. But I wanted you to know that I'm not giving up on finding something real. Good, I said. You deserve real. He hugged me then, and I realized he'd stopped looking so old. The weight had lifted from his shoulders. He was becoming himself again. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret marrying him, knowing how it ended? I thought about it. Really thought. No. Because marrying him gave me you. And everything that came after. That taught me what I'm capable of. Taught me I'm stronger than I knew. You can't regret the path that made you who you are. He nodded slowly. I'm proud of you. You know that, right? I did know. Finally. That night, alone in my house, I opened the box of documents Maribel had given me. Copies of everything. The forged signatures next to my real ones. The emails planning my erasure. The timeline of their scheme. I should have burned them. Thrown them away. But I kept them. Not to dwell on. Not to stay angry. But to remember. To remember that paper can wound as deeply as any weapon. To remember that silence and compliance nearly cost me everything. To remember that truth, preserved in files and timestamps and metadata, can outlast even the most polished lies. I put the box in the back of my closet and closed the door. The next morning, I woke up and didn't immediately think about betrayal. Didn't check my phone for threatening messages that never came anymore. Didn't brace myself for the next crisis. I just made coffee, watched the sunrise, planned my day. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Maribel called later that week. The forensic audit finished. You want the details? Just tell me if there's anything else I need to know. Nothing major. Some smaller debts your husband hid. Credit cards you didn't know about. But nothing that affects you anymore. It's all his problem now. Good. How are you doing? Really? I looked around my kitchen. At the walls I'd painted. The flowers I'd bought myself. The space that was fully, completely mine. I'm okay, I said. Actually okay. And I meant it. 6 months after the settlement, I stood in my mother's cottage for the first time since discovering it had been stolen and returned. The place smelled like dust and memories, but it was still standing. Still mine. Cashin helped me clean it out, sorting through boxes of my mother's things I'd been too heartbroken to touch after she died. Photos. Recipe cards. Letters she'd written but never sent. In the bottom of an old trunk, I found something that made me stop breathing. My mother's journal. The last entry dated 3 weeks before she passed. I sat on the floor and read. Serafina worries too much about making everyone else happy. I see it in how she moves through the world, always accommodating, always bending, always putting herself last. I want to tell her that being kind doesn't mean being erasable. That loving someone doesn't require disappearing. But she'll have to learn that herself. And when she does, when she finally stands up and refuses to be diminished, she'll be unstoppable. I just hope I'm alive to see it. I cried. Not sad tears. Grateful ones. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known. Cashin sat beside me. What is it? I showed him. He read it slowly, then looked at me with tears in his own eyes. She'd be proud of you, Mom. I hope so. We spent the rest of the day cleaning, making the cottage livable again, restoring something that had been stolen and reclaimed. When we finished, we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. What happens now? Cashin asked. Now? We live. We build. We remember that we survived something that was supposed to break us. And Dad. I thought about my husband. About 28 years of marriage that ended in courtrooms and evidence files. About love that turned out to be performance. He's not part of our story anymore. He made his choices. We made ours. Cashin nodded. Do you think you'll ever trust someone again? Date? Remarry? Maybe. Someday. When I'm ready to write that chapter. I looked at him. But first, I need to remember how to be just me. Not someone's wife. Not someone's target. Just Serafina. The woman who refused to be erased. We sat in comfortable silence as stars started appearing. My phone buzzed. A text from Maribel, final paperwork signed. It's officially over. You're free. Free. What a strange, powerful word. I thought about everything we'd been through. The discovery in the study. The forged signatures. The courthouse battles. The wedding that never happened. The public exposure and private reckonings. All of it had been necessary. All of it had been worth it. Because here's what I learned, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in court documents and metadata. Sometimes it arrives not with fanfare, but with the quiet satisfaction of seeing your name restored to deeds and accounts. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to disappear. Paper can wound as sharply as any blade. Silence can erase as effectively as fire. But truth preserved in timestamps and signatures and evidence carefully gathered, truth can outlast any lie. My son and I still carry scars. We still have moments when we remember and hurt. But we also carry proof that even when someone tries to write you out of your own life, you can rewrite the ending. I tell this story not for sympathy, not for revenge, but for anyone out there who feels themselves fading from their own existence, who feels their contributions being erased, their sacrifices forgotten, their very presence questioned. You are not crazy. You are not imagining it. And you are not powerless. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Find allies. Fight back with truth and patience and evidence that can't be argued away. And if you ever find yourself standing in a hallway holding proof of your own erasure, remember, the story isn't over. The ending hasn't been written yet. You get to write it yourself. I looked at Cashin, my son who'd become my ally and my hero. Thank you. For believing me. For fighting with me. For not letting them win. He squeezed my hand. Always, Mom. Always. The cottage would need work. The farmland needed attention. My life needed rebuilding. But for the first time in years, those felt like possibilities instead of burdens. I was Serafina Lorraine. Nearly erased but not quite. Betrayed but not broken. Written out and then written back in with ink that wouldn't fade. And I was finally completely free. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life or watched someone you love get erased, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story of courage, survival, and people who refuse to disappear. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear that they're not alone. That they're not powerless. That truth, preserved and fought for, can outlast any lie. We've got more stories coming. Stories of people who stood up, fought back, and rewrote endings that were supposed to destroy them. Don't miss them. And don't ever let anyone make you believe you're erasable. You're not. None of us are.